Agile practice, PMO, and technology services. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our first speaker. Gus Cicala founded Project Assistance in 1996 to help companies achieve better, faster, more cost-effective project-based results. Gus is a recognized portfolio and project management expert who has published many popular articles and books in the subject and is frequently asked to present on topics of interest surrounding project management. Gus?
Thank you, Daniel. And Doug, thank you for being here. And to all the people who have registered, and even more thank you to the people who showed up today, taking your valuable time out. We'll try to make this a valuable 45 to 55-minute presentation with time for questions at the end. And we're really happy to have you here. And so I'd like to introduce, first of all, just to talk about our agenda. Okay, so we're going to talk just very briefly about the evolution of methodology, specifically software development life cycles, where Agile fits into that whole landscape, some of the challenges we see out there. We're talking about this peaceful coexistence between project management, traditional project management, and the Agile methodology. So from that, we're going to treat this as a panel discussion. I'll introduce a topic. Doug will go deeper. You might have seen his title we had on the screen, on the first screen, which said PMP and Agile Guru. So Doug's got a left brain and a right brain fighting each other, and will help us sort that out today. So we'll go through some facts and some myths around how these two kinds of life cycles can live together. We'll do some poll questions and have you interact. And then we'll talk about driving change in the real world, how we bring these two worlds together, the vision, implement, and adopt methodology that can be used to do that. And finally, we'll talk about next steps and how we can approach a pilot in an organization. So the first thing I mentioned we would talk about is this idea of the evolution of methodologies. And it wasn't my idea to put my wedding picture up there from 1979, but there it is with my high school hair. And, you know, going back to that time, if we think about the late 70s and the early 80s, I was in the development world, and what you had was, you know, traditional mainframe computing, punch cards, waterfall methodology. One of the first things that I was introduced to was the Jordan structured top-down methodology, and that whole thinking that was behind that at the time. So going from that perspective, in that world, there was a couple things I want to mention. You know, the movement to object-oriented, right? Going from the waterfall methodology and some of the other things that happened. Many of you are aware of this. You know, the movement through object-oriented, time boxing, iterative, the changes from mainframe to client-based to web-based. So you know, through this movement, you know, we come to this world of Agile. I mean, I remember Grady Bush's book, Object-Oriented Programming, and one of the first statements he made in the book was that the world of development requires adult supervision. You know, and I'm sure a lot of developers, including myself, didn't take that as a positive statement, but it was Grady's way of saying that, you know, project management is needed in an application development world. As a matter of fact, we work with a lot of customers, and you know, we do a lot of project management consulting, and have found that it's really the effective project management that ultimately leads to the success of the software development. The first question I was asked in my first formal IBM project management training class in 1989 was to a group of developers, including myself, or people with development backgrounds, why do projects fail? And we all developers said, because the code didn't work. And the instructor said, wrong. It was project management that went wrong. So we'll dive through that sort of perspective, that, you know, how do we get that peaceful coexistence to happen in the real world. And each of these things provide their own value, and we'll certainly acknowledge that. So you know, methodologies were airy and soft and not very formal. We got to a point where processes became better defined. If you remember the days of Carnegie Mellon and the genesis of the Software Engineering Institute and this term CMMI, software engineering, what's that? Well, it's treating software like an engineering discipline, right? So Moore's Law was sort of happening at the same time, this idea that, you know, the number of transistors on a board was going to double every 2 years, and that frightening chart you see there are the processors that came out from the 286 and 386 and 486 and Pentium, and then it gets really crowded, right? So I have in my pocket a 64 gigabyte chip that's as big as the entire data center we had at Sun Oil in 1983, right? So that whole evolution really ends up with a reversion to flexibility, right? It's popular embraced processes that allow for more innovation, and Agile certainly is meant to drive that innovative world. Doug's going to talk to that environment. Where's Agile a good place to do this? But certainly innovation is a great place for it. So where does it fit? I always like to talk about projects, whether they're software projects, drug development projects, architectural engineering, construction projects, and anything else you can come up with in a project-based world. This idea that there's a world of strategy and governance where portfolio management lives that's really, as we look at that pyramid to the left, when we go from the mission, why does an organization exist, to the values of how we conduct our business, what our ethics are, what our vision is, where we're going to be in 3 to 5 years or 10 years, the strategy, how we're going to change, that change is driven through projects. And in the software world, it's driven by software development projects, right? So clearly, this idea, when we get down to the execution world, the execution layer, we're thinking about what does it mean to have a project be successful. And there's a very traditional answer. It's survey says on time, on budget, on spec, right? And on spec is said different ways. It's said within scope. It's said with client satisfaction. I use all those terms to say on spec, okay? So what are we talking about? We're talking about a project management life cycle, on time, on budget, a set of business controls, in balance with a life cycle, a software development life cycle that's really designed to deliver on spec, and it has its own methodology, as we know. So that's where we're going with this discussion for the next 40 minutes or so. So challenges. Let's go right into this question of why is the title of this thing called Taming the Beast, and talking about bringing peaceful coexistence as though we're at war. And so yeah, there are challenges, right? There are challenges of getting project management and Agile to live peacefully, especially people who are new to Agile, especially project managers that are used to traditional project management, or software developers that would prefer not to have project managers in the world. So, and there are some of them out there, right? So we want to talk about these two processes that allegedly are at odds, and really sort of bring us to the middle, to this point of peaceful coexistence. This idea of, can there be accurate estimates? Can we define boundaries in this world? Certainly what to look for in tools. And, Doug's got a ton of experience in this regard, and I'm going to pause just for a second just to let Doug chime in, because I know you've got something to say about this.
For right now, there's several vendors that provide excellent tools to manage the projects with. One of them is Rally, another one's Jira. In addition to that, you still have your portfolio management products that, like Microsoft, that has its portfolio management. Those things don't go away just because you're in an Agile environment. They're still applicable to today. And the other tools that you want to put in your toolbox include knowing what different Agile techniques exist out there. There's many different versions, and the application of those different versions can be anywhere from a hybrid of a plan-driven, like Waterfall, to a complete Agile that's primarily focused on software development, like the Extreme program. Most of us are used to listening about Scrum, and that's what we typically hear about, is the Scrum methodology, and that's the most popular at this point in the marketplace. So those are the kind of things that you need to be considering in terms of tools and techniques.
And we'll certainly get into that a little bit deeper, Doug, but thanks for chiming in there as we just sort of table these challenges and prepare to address them. And, so one of the challenges is it right for your organization, right? And we've got a couple slides on that. What's the right environment? Is Agile right for everybody? The fast answer is no, right? So we'll go ahead and speak to some of those challenges and why it can be challenging this is not, like a hammer where everything looks like a nail. If we take it to a screw and we hammer it into the wall, it's not going to work, right? So, or at least it's not going to stay for very long. And then, you know, the really thrust of this is the idea of change. You know, a lot of the struggle with getting Agile properly seated in an organization has to do with this concept of how we're going to deal with change. So as we think about change, Doug, again, I'll turn to you because I know you've got a lot of experience in this area and have some good ideas about how we want to think about this.
In many ways, for someone like myself who has done Waterfall for many years, and now I've also been in the process of doing multi-thousand-hour projects in Agile. So the practice of doing those things and working in those areas requires cultural change within an organization. It's not something you can go in one day and say, I'm going to put in an Agile methodology, and we're going to replace all the Waterfall and all the time plan-driven approaches. And here's what's my analogy there is, would you do an Agile project with Waterfall? Would you implement a cultural change in a big bang approach like a Waterfall? And I think the answer to that is, if you're going to implement Agile, you need to do it in an Agile way.
Well said, Doug.
Those are the kind of things you need to do.
Okay, so we'll address that. What do we mean by implementing this thing in an Agile way? As a matter of fact, it's the final slide for today. Really talking from how we go to an Agile roadmap to an Agile implementation. But let's go ahead and dive a little bit deeper into this panel discussion. Between the introduction I'll take, you know, from my years of being a developer, but really most recently for the past 20 years, close to 20 years, running this company called Project Assistance, really in a project management consulting world, in which software development was a big part of the kinds of projects we dealt with, as well as Doug's perspective and his significant experience on both driving PMOs as well as driving the delivery of Agile-based projects. So to get us started, one of the first things we want to think about is to get you a little bit involved. Okay, so our first poll is we're going to launch here. Okay, so you should have the opportunity on your screen to answer some questions, and what we'll do is when we get some answers, we'll go ahead and close the poll. And so the question is, how many constraints do Agile methods provide? None, few, as many as a PM method. Organizational approach is the biggest determinant. So we have a lot of people weighing in at the moment. We've got 44% of the vote in. We've passed 50% of the vote. We are almost at 61%. We'll give it about another 15 seconds. So if you're still thinking about your answer, you got about 10 seconds left. We are weighed in at the 70% point. And 5 seconds. Okay, the poll's been open for 1 minute. We're going to go ahead and close that poll. Okay, and then we can share the poll. So here's what the majority said, that it, you know, really depends on the organizational approach, and that gives us sort of your perspective. So as we go into you know, as we go into this question, really the question is Agile free of constraints? Okay, so to that end, I'll click on pause, and I got to play. Thank you. Fact or myth, Agile is free of constraints. And so as we begin to answer that question, okay, there's this you know, question about project management, right? Is, you know, all of the pre-implementation artifacts are defined as usual. You know, how do we deal with this question of is Agile free of constraints? And I'm going to pass that over to our guru to go a little bit deeper on that question. Thanks, Doug.
Right. And so in the beginning the with the Agile process, you still have your feasibility, initiation phases, net present value, the internal rate of return, all of the traditional ways of selecting projects are still there. You still do RFPs. There's still SOWs to do, statements of work, and then moving forward with that, you still end up within the process of the Agile needing to do product analysis, in the market need. What's the need in the market for the product today? The thing that Agile provides in this respect, with shorter iterations than the traditional Waterfall approach, the advantage of Agile is you can make adjustments as you go through the project, and find that in the marketplace, technology may have changed, or your product may have slightly changed, and you can make those adjustments as you go through the process. When in the process of doing your individual sprints, and then within the framework, that's what we're looking at making daily changes and looking at how the market's evaluating, and at the end of an iteration, you go back and you look to see through retrospects and what has happened during this process, and did we meet the product delivery? Is the release going to be what the market was expecting at this point? You may have to do modifications at that point. So that's another area where the Agile approach tends to have better capabilities in the marketplace to make changes. And finally, we was just saying, you go back and you revisit, is our design still correct? Will we be going forward and looking at the product owner? From the product owner's viewpoint, did we satisfy the business needs, the business value? If we're not satisfying the business value at this point in the process, then we need to go back and revisit the delivery in an iteration, or sprint as it's called in Scrum. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at in terms of how Agile is beneficial to the organization. And then looking at this moves right into the hybrid methodology, where we found in the market, and on a 100,000-hour project, it ended up in a 100,000-hour project. It was a global project that was done in Agile. We came up and finally came to the realization that you still have a program management lifecycle, and that moves along with your system development lifecycle at these points. So you end up looking at this and doing the plan, because management wants to know when are we going to get finished and what's the value to the organization. But in looking at this diagram here, you see that we're going through the sprints, and we're still looking at backlog, we're still looking at velocity for the estimation process, and then at the program earned value methods applied to your Agile processes. But if you look at the larger circles there, during the process of the sprint where you're inspecting and adapting, you really suspend at that point your program management lifecycle updating. And at the end of the sprint, when you're doing your retrospects, your releases, and looking to see if your product deliverables are what they should be, the larger circle there is showing you're really applying Agile processes to your program management lifecycle and reevaluating where we're at that point in the cycle, and will we be on target, and will we reach our plan. Now, this is where we get into the issue, is management, are we providing to our senior level management the knowledge that they need to know where we're at? And that includes, and as much as we hate Gantt charts in Agile, that does include producing Gantt charts for the executives. But then the next step is you move into the next sprint, you suspend all of your looking at the plan and program so your engineers can concentrate on delivering the next set of backlog that comes from your product backlog into your release backlog, and then finally comes into your sprint backlog. So that's what this diagram is showing, you really can move both of them through the process. It doesn't preclude, one set of planning doesn't preclude the other set of planning. And it's just a matter of perspective at this point.
Certainly, Doug, I think one of the reasons you say that is you've been in situations where the developers didn't necessarily agree with that, right? That they're not, developers sometimes like to say things like, well, by taking time to help you build a plan, I can't get my development work done, right?
Right. So that's where, in terms of, sometimes you need to change your terminology when you're working with a lot of people that are agile bigots and also waterfall bigots. But if you look at the terms there, inspect and adapt, that's really, if you want to use semantics, that's monitoring and controlling. You're still, in monitoring, it's inspecting to see if you're on track. And adapting is really, is modifying control to say, okay, I'm out of control at this point, so how can I adapt to get myself back in control? So those are the kind of things you have to think about. It's a matter of terminology. So but we'll run up against a lot of engineers that will start, if you start saying monitoring, controlling, they stop listening to you at that point. So from a project manager standpoint, we need to learn the terminology and how it applies to Agile, even though it's really a lot of semantics in some cases.
Right, those semantics are important in this environment, and that's part of what we really want. The peaceful coexistence comes through respect of those semantics and understanding those semantics.
And it's the cultural change we're talking about. Cultural change brings different terminology to the people that's involved in these processes.
Good, great, thanks. So shall we move on to the next slide?
Yes. So in looking at the process of your project management processes, your primary processes in your are your planning iteration, your release increments, and your release to market. And each one of your iterations should provide a releasable product at least to your programmers. That's one view. That's not to your end customer, or to your QA group, if you have a group that's going to be QA in the product. And in a lot of cases, we tend to, especially in Scrum, there tends to not be a QA group. But in an extreme program, there is the concept of QA. So, but these are overall things that fit within each of the process. So that the release increment should be never be more than 1 to 3 months of delivering something that can be evaluated as a deliverable.
Okay, thanks, Doug. So just to take this step further, let's drop down to the next level and talk a little bit about how we go through this process within the, I guess we'll call it the Agile iteration.
Yes. So as we've talked, and this is just another way of looking at the items, but you have the inception of your project, with same as with Waterfall or any other methodology, project chartering and kickoff. Where you start getting into the differences is during the discovery and planning phases. And that's where, in an Agile project, you want to do release planning, and you want to have a product owner that's going to be the primary person that's going to be responsible for what's included in those releases. And the idea is that is always to keep your focus on business value at these points. So you move into the development process, and that's where your team, working with the product owner, selects what will be of value during a business value deliverable during this process. And that's during the development. Then the whole process is planning the iteration and doing the execution and showing results and reflecting and adapt, and then revise the product backlog. And that, again, we should always keep focus on the business value here. And then the final part of it is conducting a release retrospective. Now but during each iteration, you'll do a retrospective as well. So the arrows in here are showing that until you finish what's been done in the release plan, you continue to go between discovery and planning and development. And then when the final product is finished, then you'll do a final release.
Okay, good. So that's sort of the depth we want to go into in terms of this methodology, and certainly as we turn the page here, this next concept here is how we go through this a little bit deeper.
Right. So as I said before, the prioritization of the requirements is the primary responsibility of your product owner, product manager. In some Agile methodologies, it's called product manager, but it's the same functionality. And then the concept of estimating is all based off of velocity, and that's where experience with the Agile process is extremely important in your estimating process, because it's all based off of the individual and the interaction between the individuals. So in order to do your estimations, which is always one of the issues, is doing the big picture estimation versus the sprint estimation, which are two different types of estimates. But the velocity within the sprints or iterations are what's important at this point. And then finally, your release planning and breaking your project, that's what the arrow was trying to show in that previous diagram about the PMLC versus your SDLC. That's where the SDLC using Agile is breaking everything down into smaller, more manageable releases so that your teams can manage within themselves. And then, as I said, tracking the velocity is very important in this process, and getting a history of the background. And finally, you know, each one of the sprints is basically time boxed. I know in Scrum, the Scrum, generally people don't like to refer to time boxing, but it happens. It's just another way of saying that things have a certain length of time and when you're done. In Scrum, we like to refer to as when are we done. And finally, in order to look at your business value, as with Waterfall or plan-driven, any type of methodology, you have to look at your requirements and do they match the business goals? Are they valuable to the business? And I think that's the key to any project, right, Gus?
Well, I was just going to say that, Doug. You know, you're going down this list, and I'm hearing waterfall terminology, I'm hearing project management terminology, but what I'm also seeing is that terminology reflected in an appropriate Agile reflection or rendering. So again, you know, we talk about Agile, hybrid adaptive planning, you know, core practices, and yet we see words like requirements and estimating. And if I read each bullet, if I pull some key notes out of there: requirements, estimating, planning, releases, tracking. We see time, right? We see the concept of getting done. We see the concept of requirements traceability, and not only that, but linking that traceability back to a business plan, right? So we're not out of sync with, certainly in my opinion, my decades of being around project management, this is not out of sync with project management. This looks like peaceful coexistence to me.
Yeah, and it's the same. If you read the Agile Manifesto, the things on the Agile side versus the items that are on the Waterfall or plan-driven side, Agile doesn't say individuals and interactions over process and tools, and that you forget process and tools. They just say, Agile is saying, focus on individual and interactions. But you still have to have processes and tools in place in order for this to go forward. And the same thing with the working software versus comprehensive documentation. The idea is you do the appropriate amount of documentation, but the thing that's providing you value here is the working software. So Agile doesn't say we're not going to have any documentation. Agile says minimize the documentation in favor of working software. And then the other one is customer collaboration versus contract negotiation. Once again, anytime you're working with vendors, you're still going to have some contract negotiation, but at least the point here is be more collaborative in terms of what you're designing, so everything works for everybody. And the final part of that is responding to change in Agile versus following a plan. Responding to change is you have to have a plan in order to be able to respond to the change.
Otherwise, what are we changing?
Yeah, what are you changing? So, exactly. Thanks, guys. That's a good comment. Okay, so that's the kind of things that we're looking at in this process here.
Great. Thanks, Doug. And then sort of the final point here, as we talk about minimize use of Gantt charts, let's move over to this idea of the iteration plan versus the release plan. And again, Doug, if you just sort of take us through these concepts.
Right. So this becomes the iteration plan versus your release plan. The iteration plan is looking primarily at your technical development and your work plan. The release plan is at the business level, where you would be more more likely to be reporting to the business and your stakeholders and the business owners of what's going to the market. So in this respect, this all goes back to that other diagram that we started off with. We're going to track progress. We're going to adjust the expectations, and the project is up to once we get to the retrospective and the deliverable for iteration, then we go back to the big circle there and start looking at how does this fit within our release. Did we do what we were supposed to do? And now how are we going to adjust going forward our big plan using Gantt charts? How do we adjust that going forward and all the sprints going forward in order to meet that business value that we promised our stakeholders? So that's primarily how we look at those things. As far as your iteration plan primarily looks at your agile deliverables, you're breaking it down into more manageable parts, and your release plan then is looking at, are we delivering value to the business, and are we delivering what we said we were going to deliver?
Great. Thanks, Doug. So now we get to this final topic before we get into our next poll, this idea of project management and planning, and again, this agile, hybrid, adaptive planning, and what we do at the business level plan. So again, Doug, if you could just sort of close us out on this topic with these next set of questions here.
All right. And I know that every project manager out there, and whether you've been managing an agile project or you're managing a plan-driven project like Waterfall, it's always, is the project on track? Is the next release going to be late? What will be in the next release? And has anything slipped that we would plan to deliver in this release of the product through this iteration? Has it slipped to the next release? So that puts the burden on the product owner and product manager and the project team to keep delivering in a sustainable manner and delivering value to the business in these processes. So these are the questions that a project manager always needs to be asking themselves, regardless of whether it's an agile or a plan-driven project.
So these are allowed, Doug. That's what you're saying. This is fair territory in the agile world.
Yes.
We should, our agile development team should expect and be prepared to answer these questions, and they're in bounds, essentially.
Yes.
Okay, good. So that brings us to our next poll question. And so if you could get your clickers ready there to vote on this next poll. Our next poll is talking about traditional project management, and this is a fun one. And the reason it's fun is because we ask the question, in traditional project management, the endpoints are absolute and fixed. They're flexible, they're changeable, but only with great difficulty, or it depends on the organization approach and culture. So we'll leave this poll open for about a minute. Okay, so we got about 60% have come in. The voting is slowing down. I'll give about 5 more seconds. If you're thinking about your answer, please get it in so we can close the poll. 3, 2, 1, and we're closed. And here comes the answer. So, interesting. Flexible was dead last. And, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we want to talk about that. We expected a wide variation of answers, and I'm not surprised that in an Agile poll that we're talking about that endpoints in traditional project management are not flexible. And, personally, that comes from a lot of organizations where there's a feeling of inflexibility, despite the fact that as we talk about the iron triangle, the triple constraint model, we even see the picture here that Dan picked, which looks like I'm about to get in a lot of trouble from somebody that's doing some things the old traditional way here. As we look at this concept of absolute and fixed, flexible, changeable, but only with great difficulty, depends on the organization. Certainly, we've all lived in a world where it felt absolute and fixed, and we won't get into our traditional project management discussion about how scope management occurs and what the difference is between time and materials and firm fixed price. But the reality is, the triple constraint model tells us if scope changes, schedule or resource are going to have to change. If resources change, scope or schedule are going to have to change. So, I mean, certainly traditional project management is supposed to be flexible. Whether or not that happens in your organization is really kind of what we want to talk about next is, what's the environment, right? Project management prescribes inflexible endpoints, factor myth, and the reality is in some cases, right, when I always talk about this bad parenting environment, right, where stakeholders are inflexible, right? So we're in an environment where we're begging management to understand that the scope has changed, so we're going to need more time, or the scope has changed, so maybe additional resources can help us stay on schedule. That's flexibility, right? Does that mean we're going to be in a flexible environment all the time? And the answer is no, not really, right? So that's one of the challenges we have, and certainly project management and Agile are closer than perception has it, right? So, and Doug has already addressed much of that, but as we go down to the bottom half here, Doug, I'm going to go ahead again and toss this over to you so we can talk about this common theme here.
Yeah, I think one of the key concepts in all of this is the communications effort. The project that I was discussing earlier that was ended up in over 100,000 man-hours and was global in nature. We had people in Pune, India, California, Huntsville, Alabama, and Florida. We were at the end of the sprints, we were constantly being asked, when are you going to be done? And management, the stakeholders, didn't care whether it's Agile or whether it was traditional project management. They just wanted to know, were we going to be late on delivery? And that was in the process. We went through school, I would say the school of hard knocks in this case. We went in and implemented Agile without doing a lot of research into the culture. So what we found is that we had to do this long-term delivery and do our sprint planning in a way that we had a Microsoft project plan that did the long-term project management life cycle, and we did used Rally as the tool to do the detailed sprint delivery. So we still had to anticipate communications. We had to know who the right stakeholders are. It doesn't stop. You still have to do stakeholder analysis to determine who the primary stakeholders are in the project, regardless of whether it's Agile or whether it's plan-driven approach like Waterfall. So I think the biggest issue here is having the right people with the right experience and communicating always. That's probably where Agile has everything over, more over plan-driven approach because it demands that you communicate and communicate and communicate through daily scrums and those things. So I think if anything, if plan-driven approaches have anything to learn from Agile, it's to communicate more often and communicate the right information at the right time.
Great, thanks, Doug. It reminds me a little bit of the three secrets of real estate, right? Location, location, location.
Yeah.
And certainly, you know, we hear that in project management, but the Agile methodology certainly is bred with that DNA into it. So that's an important distinction, I think. And again, why we talk about this, you know, taming this beast is it's not a beast. It's something that's meant to deliver success, and certainly can exist peacefully with project management. So that brings us to our next fact or myth question, and it brings us to our next poll. And in this particular poll, we're going to ask the question, how is scope determined for an Agile project? And we'll go ahead and leave this one up there for about a minute. We've got a pretty clear majority. We're at the 50% point. Actually, we've got an 80-20 rule going, believe it or not. So we're going to give about 5 more seconds. We've got 70% of the vote in. 3, 2, 1, and we're closed. And here comes the answer. And so, Doug, you want to comment on that this time?
Yeah, I think this is pretty accurate because expertise and historical information is a lot of the information that's used, but you still have quantitative and qualitative data. As I said, net present value, return on investment, all the traditional ways of coming up with the feasibility of a project. And am I even going to go forward with the project is still applicable. If you're doing sheer guesswork on the project, then you're probably going to fail regardless of which methodology you're going through. But going forward, I mean, it's the same. It's feasibility, initiation, and then you start the release planning. And there are high-level scoping. There is high-level scoping done.
Right, so this fact or myth question, not surprisingly, that we just led up, and thank you for your help with our interaction with the audience, but this idea that Agile has nebulous scopes, you know, fact or myth, and again, Doug, you know, I'll ask you to, you know, sort of take the time on this one and, you know, talk about what it's based on and then talk about, you know, what you can estimate.
Much of the information and how you go through Agile is based off of the individuals and interactions of the individual. And velocity is key. So when you first start in Agile in your organization, you start developing this historical information on velocity and within a team of velocity. The idea is that you hope to keep a good team together and have a sustainable process where your people are not overworked and aren't dead at the end of the 4-month project by working tons of overtime hours toward the end. And again, the knowledge of the project. Expertise is the complexity of the project. You know, the way the PMI is working toward this right now, they just, in their certification process, they're only looking at the simplest case. But Agile is scalable. As I've mentioned, we had a worldwide, a global project going on, and we implemented it with the Agile technology, Agile methodology in place. How many stories it will take? There's formulas in Agile that you use to determine how many stories based off of your past experience. And then with that, you will know how many resources you're going to have and the amount of time that it's going to take to do and how many sprints it's going to take to go through it. So it's those are the things that the scope is there.
The scope is there, and then so as we come down to our final topic here, the question becomes, how do we deal with some of the these deeper topics here? And I think you covered most of this, but if there's anything you want to highlight here, Doug.
No, I think
we've covered that one, right? So this next poll is really going to get to the essence of how about the organizational level? So let's go ahead and put our final poll out there, and where does this stuff work well? And we'll go ahead and ask the audience to help us with the answer, and we'll cover this this final factor myth, and then get into how we can move to an implementation framework. Okay, we've got 3/4 of the folks in. You came in real fast this time. People get usually less engaged as we get into the polls. You seem to be getting more engaged, so thank you for that. I'm going to give about 5 seconds here before we close it. And 3, 2, 1. Here's the close. Here's the share. And Doug, if you wouldn't mind, over to you. I don't think you'll find anything too surprising here. Setting you up well for your next slide.
Yeah, it does. Really, you have to be able to have a dynamic organization in order to be able to do Agile. The structure of the organization, you have to be able to handle change. But there are things that don't fit well with Agile. One of them I keep hearing as example is Black Ops. When you're going in and everybody needs to be synchronized and together, it's kind of difficult to let people pick the role they want to have during that process.
Sure.
So there are things that don't fit.
Okay. So it only works in certain kinds of organizations.
I think there's very few organizations where it wouldn't work, and there's no reason why an organization can't maintain both a plan-driven approach for projects they believe should be plan-driven and an Agile approach for another. In fact, the CA Clarity is designed that way so that you can use Microsoft Project to manage part of the project and in the portfolio management project process, and you can use the Agile approach in another area. So it's not, using one in an organization doesn't preclude the other. So that if you have projects like a Black Ops comes up and you need to have extreme control over it, then that opportunity is there. So I wouldn't say it. A lot of Agile people want to go and say the whole organization has to go Agile. It doesn't have to be that way.
Okay, good. So driving the change, this idea of, okay, how do we take theory and put it into practice? Yeah, we've had a lot of good discussion about theory and a lot of practical ideas about this, but ultimately, what we really want to think when we think about when we go in the change in the real world has everything to do with risk and reward and what kind of profiles are best. Every project shouldn't be used to pilot an Agile methodology for sure.
Right. And if you're moving your organization to an Agile process, you don't want to take your most important enterprise project and do that first. That's probably not going to work for your organization because you have a whole. It's not just IT involved in this. It's your marketing, it's finance, it's your senior level executives. So it has to be done slowly. It has to be a cultural change within your organization to either accept both or to accept one or the other in this case.
Great. So again, this idea of introducing Agile with an Agile lens, this brings us down close to the finish line. Something you said at the beginning, Doug, is using an Agile methodology to implement Agile, and so we want to talk about how we can implement Agile for a little bit.
Right. So I would select a project that's new, one that's small and doesn't have a major impact on your organization, to develop your artifacts and to develop your processes and procedures that you want to use. And again, using some of the older concepts, use train the trainer then, or have your evangelists go out from those projects and implement the Agile process in the organization going forward.
Right. And as you mentioned already, you know, there's pushback against project managers, and the language that we use matters. Right?
Yeah,
So,
your project managers need to learn the terminology used in Agile. I mean, that's one of the first things when I started working with some people that had only done Agile, started pushing back when I started talking about planning. Well, you know, planning is, you know, look at how we're going to do as far as the change. You know, we're responding to change, but as we said before, without a plan, how do you know what you're changing in order to go forward? Right.
So a lot of this has to do with, you know, being respectful for what Agile is, being knowledgeable of what Agile is, understanding what the language is, and you know, easing ourselves into the right position in the Agile methodology. And to that end, you know, when we talk about change, oftentimes, you know, we're asked to implement something. Can you come implement an Agile methodology? And certainly the way we think about this is from a vision standpoint. You know, where do you take Agile? Where do you start? And of course, you know, Agile is a process, right? And a process needs some level of tools and technology, and you addressed that a little bit in the beginning, but certainly there are project management and Agile tools out there. There's knowledge of the people. You know, change always involves doing new things. So if we're going to ask people who don't know how to do the things we're asking them to do, there's concerns there. And the overall governance and how we drive the change has to come from executives. But at the end of the day, when we think about, you know, planning for an Agile implementation, the real question is, where are you today? Have you done it before? Do you have pilots? Is there, what is the project management methodology? Is there a project management methodology? I mean, everybody likes to think there is, but oftentimes we know that's not even the case, right? So you know, we tend to, in our methodology, which is what we're talking about now, the project management, or project assistance methodology, it's this question of what's the current state, what's the future state, what's the gap. And in an Agile world, that's really a hybrid look at, if you're familiar with PMI's OPM3, or the Organizational Project Management Maturity Model, we have our own flavor of that. Certainly CMMI and the Software Engineering Institute has its way of looking at the future. So as we look at where we are and what the future looks like, it's those perspectives from the project management world, from the software engineering world, that will get us to the vision that can get into a roadmap that says, well, how do we do this, right? So when we get to implementation, that there's something that's sensible done from the analysis, from the vision, comes a roadmap, which, surprise, surprise, looks like a project plan. Oh, my Lord. So doing things in an Agile way is still done in a project-based environment. Certainly the implementation looks at what does the organization require, how do we align the process, what kind of tools will be used, customization, integration, all those things. But really adoption is the key. And Doug, I think you've addressed this pretty well in terms of the culture, but certainly what you know, the idea, inspect what you expect, and what measures what gets measured gets managed is very important here. So our final slide or two before we turn this over to the floor for questions and answers, certainly in terms of next steps, Doug, if you would just sort of close us out with just sort of a quick summary of, you know, how do we get from we haven't done Agile to the bottom part of this slide here.
Well, you know, the one thing I think is important is that whoever you have helping you implement an Agile methodology in an organization, having a group that's done Waterfall before and one that's done Agile before is key. I mean, it's like the yin and the yang of everything. If you don't know what one is, how can you do the other? And then if we're looking at you know, doing advising in the organization and planning the phases and visioning stuff, and then finally I would do a pilot project, like I said, with a gradual implementation and flowing it out to the rest of your organization. So those are the kind of things I would do as far as moving into implementation.
Okay, thanks, Doug. And so what I want to do is, with the last couple of minutes we have, is there is a question and answer poll. We have had a large number of questions, and I know you've been looking at the at the console. I don't know if you've had any opportunity to net that out a little bit, but if you want to peel off a couple of the top points here, we can go a little bit past the top of the hour for anybody who wants to stay on, but we'll pick off the juicy ones first. And Dan, I'll let you decide what's juicy. Hopefully you'll pick ones that we can answer.
All right. Well, thanks, Doug, and thanks, Gus, for an engaging conversation. We can stay over a bit if you guys would like all your questions answered, but there certainly were a lot coming in. You guys were very active on the console. So what would you recommend among Scrum, Kanban, et cetera, within Agile?
Those are the same questions. I think it's what makes sense for your organization. Scrum is, like I said, is the simplest to implement. It's the simplest to understand, but it may not be what your organization wants to do. Like the XP is more oriented towards software development and how the engineers and people do the project. So Scrum's a little bit more project-oriented, and XP is more oriented toward the engineering area. So those are the two probably that you would have the most contrast within Agile. So,
good. Excellent. And if an Agile project is part of a large Waterfall project, does it make sense to have a sub-project plan for the Agile part and incorporate it into the larger project plan?
I would, if you have an Agile within a Waterfall project, I'm not sure how to answer that question.
You're running one like that
now,
aren't you?
Yeah. It's kind of it causes a lot more conflict actually within the organization. I think you probably a project or program should it drive with one or the other because you're going to run into a lot of conflicts if you try to intermix them together.
Okay, good. Thanks. And just to add to that, I mean, we always have the idea that the program sets the milestones and the projects sort of find a way to meet those milestones.
Right.
My preference is as a project manager is I don't have to ask you about a lot of detail. You hit the milestones and we're good.
And I think the key there is running the program more like a Waterfall or a plan-driven approach, and running your engineering development area in more of an Agile approach. If you're going to, is the more appropriate way of a hybrid. A hybrid should not be meaning that one room group is running Waterfall and another is running Agile. That's not that sets you up for a lot of conflict.
That's not really peaceful coexistence, is it?
Right. No. That's end up with arguments. Yeah.
Any more, Dan? You want to pick another one or two off of the large number you received?
Yeah, we can take another one or two. What do you say to back to language and how do you speak in an Agile language? What do you say to leadership that is sure that Agile does not require requirements? How do you change the language to get this point through?
Well, if you look at the terminology that's used in marketplace, you have product owners and product managers that are part of the business, and involving the business in the process, you start talking about the product owner developing the requirements and bringing the vision that the business has decided for the project into the Agile process. So it's basically start talking about business value. Talk about return on investment. Agile process is all about return on investment and business value. So those are the kinds, you need to talk business terms to the business guys, to the stakeholders, if you're trying to talk about Agile.
Good, good. And we're a little bit over on time. We had several other questions, but our contact information is up here. We will have the slides available. They're not there yet, so I did see a question that you can't download the slides yet. So if you can give us a little bit of time to get them out there, they'll be out there in a PDF version. My email address is here. Doug's email address is here. The video will be out there. Our past webinars are out there. This webinar is typically out there within 24 to 48 hours. So if you have friends and colleagues and co-workers who didn't have a chance to see this that you think might want to share that, you certainly can do that. We appreciate your attendance, your participation, and we'll look forward to crossing paths sometime in the future. I see a lot of friends in the registration list, so thanks to our traditional project assistance friends, and again, thanks to the new people who have come to join us today. We thank you very much for your time, and hopefully you'll stay tuned for our future newsletters and our future webinars, and we'll see you sometime soon. Thank you.